File 8.
Ursula was become pretty spry, but the kitten was spryer, and she couldn't catch it, and had to give up. Then Satan said, "Give it a name, and maybe it'll come." Ursula tried several names, but the kitten was not interested. "Call it Agnes. Try that." The creature answered to the name and came. Ursula examined its tongue. "Oh, upon my word, it's true," she said. "I've not seen this kind of a cat before. Is it yours?" "No." "Then how did you know its name so pat?" "Because all cats of that breed are named Agnes. They will not answer to any other." Ursula was impressed. "Oh, it's the most wonderful thing." Then a shadow of trouble came into her face, for her superstitions were aroused, and she reluctantly put the creature down, saying, "I suppose I must let it go. I'm not afraid. No, not exactly that, though the priest, well, I've heard people, indeed many people, and besides it's quite well now and can take care of itself." She sighed and turned to go, murmuring, "Oh, such a pretty one, too, and would be such company, and the house is so sad and lonesome these troubled days. Miss Margaret's so mournful and just a shadow, and the old master shut up in jail." "It seems a pity not to keep it," said Satan. Ursula turned quickly, just as if she were hoping someone would encourage her. "Why?" she asked wistfully. "Because this breed brings luck." "Does it? Is it true? Young man, do you know it to be true? How does it bring luck?" "Well, it brings money, anyway." Ursula looked disappointed.
"Money? A cat bring money? Oh, the idea! You could never sell it here. People don't buy cats here. One can't even give them away."
She turned to go.
"I don't mean sell it. I mean have an income from it. This kind is called the lucky cat. Its owner finds 4 silver groschen in his pocket every morning."
I saw the indignation rising in the old woman's face. She was insulted. This boy was making fun of her. That was her thought. She thrust her hands into her pockets and straightened up to give him a piece of her mind. Her temper was all up and hot. Her mouth came open and let out 3 words of a bitter sentence. Then it fell silent, and the anger in her face turned to surprise, or wonder, or fear, or something, and she slowly brought out her hands from her pockets, opened them, and held them so. In one was my piece of money. In the other lay 4 silver groschen. She gazed a little while, perhaps to see if the groschen would vanish away. Then she said fervently, "Oh, it's true! It's true! And I'm ashamed and beg forgiveness, oh dear master and benefactor." And she ran to Satan and kissed his hand over and over again, according to the Austrian custom. In her heart she probably believed it was a witch-cat and an agent of the devil, but no matter, it was all the more certain to be able to keep its contract and furnish a daily good living for the family, for in matters of finance even the piousest of our peasants would have more confidence in an arrangement with the devil than with an archangel. Ursula started homeward with Agnes in her arms, and I said I wished I had her privilege of seeing Margaret. Then I caught my breath, for we were there, in the parlour, and Margaret standing looking at us, astonished. She was feeble and pale, but I knew that those conditions would not last in Satan's atmosphere, and it turned out so. I introduced Satan, that is, Philip Traum, and we sat down and talked. There was no constraint. We were simple folk in our village, and when a stranger was a pleasant person, we were soon friends. Margit wondered how we got in without her hearing us. Traum said the door was open, and we walked in and waited until she should turn around and greet us. This was not true. No door was open. We entered through the walls, or the roof, or down the chimney, or somehow. But no matter. What Satan wished a person to believe, the person was sure to believe. And so Margit was quite satisfied with that explanation. And then the main part of her mind was on Traum anyway. She couldn't keep her eyes off him. He was so beautiful. That gratified me and made me proud. I hoped he would show off some, but he didn't. He seemed only interested in being friendly and telling lies. He said he was an orphan. That made Margit pity him. The water came into her eyes. He said he had never known his mamma. She passed away while he was a young thing, and said his papa was in shattered health, and had no property to speak of. In fact, none of any earthly value. But he had an uncle in business down in the tropics, and he was very well off, and had a monopoly, and it was from this uncle that he drew his support. The very mention of a kind uncle was enough to remind Margit of her own, and her eyes filled again. She said she hoped their two uncles would meet some day. It made me shudder. Philip said he hoped so too, and that made me shudder again.
"Oh, maybe they will," said Margit. "Does your uncle travel much?"
"Oh, yes. He goes all about. He has business everywhere." And so they went on chatting, and poor Margit forgot her sorrow for one little while anyway. It was probably the only bright and cheery hour she had known lately. I saw she liked Philip, and I knew she would. And when he told her he was studying for the ministry, I could see that she liked him better than ever. And then, when he promised to get her admitted to the jail so that she could see her uncle, that was the capstone. He said he would give the guards a little present, and she must always go in the evening after dark, and say nothing, but just show this paper and pass in, and show it again when you come out. And he scribbled some queer marks on the paper and gave it to her, and she was ever so thankful, and right away was in a fever for the sun to go down. For in that old, cruel time, prisoners were not allowed to see their friends, and sometimes they spent years in the jails without ever seeing a friendly face. I judged that the marks on the paper were an enchantment, and that the guards would not know what they were doing, nor have any memory of it afterward. And that was indeed the way of it. Ursula put her head in at the door and said,
"Supper's ready, miss."
Then she saw us, and looked frightened, and motioned for me to come to her, which I did, and she asked if we had told about the cat. I said no, and she was relieved, and said, "Please don't, for if Miss Margit knew, she would think it was an unholy cat, and would send for a priest, and have its gifts all purified out of it, and then there wouldn't be any more dividends." So I said we wouldn't tell, and she was satisfied. Then I was beginning to say good-bye to Margit, but Satan interrupted, and said, ever so politely, Well, I don't remember just the words, but anyway, he as good as invited himself to supper. And me, too. Of course, Margaret was miserably embarrassed, for she had no reason to suppose there would be half enough for a sick bird. Ursula heard him, and she came straight into the room, not a bit pleased. At first she was astonished to see Margaret looking so fresh and rosy, and said so. Then she spoke up in her native tongue, which was Bohemian, and said, as I learned afterwards, "Send him away, Miss Margaret. There's not victuals enough." Before Margaret could speak, Satan had the word, and was talking back to Ursula in her own language, which was a surprise to her, and for her mistress too. He said, "Didn't I see you down the road a while ago?"
"Oh, yes, sir."
"Ah, that pleases me. I see you remember me." He stepped to her and whispered, "I told you it's a lucky cat. Don't be troubled. It will provide." That sponged the slate of Ursula's feelings clean of its anxieties, and a deep financial joy shone in her eyes. The cat's value was augmenting. It was getting full time for Margaret to take some sort of notice of Satan's invitation, and she did it in the best way, the honest way that was natural to her. She said she had little to offer, but that we were welcome if we would share it with her. We had supper in the kitchen, and Ursula waited at table. A small fish was in the frying-pan, crisp and brown and tempting, and one could see that Margaret was not expecting such respectable food as this. Ursula brought it, and Margaret divided it between Satan and me, declining to take any of it herself, and was beginning to say she did not care for fish today, but she did not finish the remark. It was because she noticed that another fish had appeared in the pan. She looked surprised, but did not say anything. She probably meant to inquire of Ursula about this later. There were other surprises, flesh and game, and wines and fruits, things which had been strangers in that house lately. But Margaret made no exclamations, and now even looked unsurprised, which was Satan's influence, of course. Satan talked right along and was entertaining, and made the time pass pleasantly and cheerfully, and although he told a good many lies, it was no harm in him, for he was only an angel, and did not know any better. They do not know right from wrong. I knew this, because I remembered what he had said about it. He got on the good side of Ursula. He praised her to Margaret confidentially, but speaking out loud enough for Ursula to hear. He said she was a fine woman, and he hoped one day to bring her and his uncle together. Very soon Ursula was mincing and simpering around in a ridiculous, girly way, and smoothing out her gown and prinking at herself like a foolish old hen, and all the time pretending she was not hearing what Satan was saying. I was ashamed, for it showed us to be what Satan considered us, a silly race and trivial. Satan said his uncle entertained a great deal, and to have a clever woman presiding over the festivities would double the attractions of the place.
"But your uncle is a gentleman, isn't he?"
asked Margaret. "Yes," said Satan indifferently. "Some even call him a prince, out of compliment. But he's not bigoted. To him personal merit is everything. Rank, nothing." My hand was hanging down by my chair. Agnes came along and licked it. By this act a secret was revealed. I started to say,
It's all a mistake. This is just a common, ordinary cat. The hair needles on her tongue point inward, not outward. But the words did not come, because they couldn't. Satan smiled upon me, and I understood. When it was dark, Marget took food and wine and fruit in a basket, and hurried away to the jail, and Satan and I walked towards my home. I was thinking to myself that I should like to see what the inside of the jail was like. Satan overheard the thought, and the next moment we were in the jail. We were in the torture chamber, Satan said. The rack was there, and the other instruments, and there was a smoky lantern or two hanging on the walls, and helping to make the place look dim and dreadful. There were people there, and executioners, but as they took no notice of us, it meant that we were invisible. A young man lay bound, and Satan said he was suspected of being a heretic, and the executioners were about to inquire into it. They asked the man to confess to the charge, and he said he could not, for it was not true. Then they drove splinter after splinter under his nails, and he shrieked with the pain. Satan was not disturbed, but I could not endure it, and had to be whisked out of there. I was faint and sick, but the fresh air revived me, and we walked toward my home. I said it was a brutal thing. No, it was a human thing. You should not insult the brutes by such a misuse of that word. They've not deserved it. And he went on talking like that. It's like your paltry race, always lying, always claiming virtues which it hasn't got, always denying them to the higher animals, which alone possess them. No brute ever does such a cruel thing. That's the monopoly of those with the moral sense. When a brute inflicts pain, he does it innocently. It's not wrong. For him there is no such thing as wrong. He does not inflict pain for the pleasure of inflicting it. Only man does that, inspired by that mongrel moral sense of his, a sense whose function is to distinguish between right and wrong, with liberty to choose which of them he will do. Now what advantage can he get out of that? He is always choosing, and in 9 cases out of 10 he prefers the wrong. There shouldn't be any wrong, and without the moral sense there couldn't be any. And yet he's such an unreasoning creature that he's not able to perceive that the moral sense degrades him into the bottom layer of animated beings, and is a shameful possession. Are you feeling better?